It's good to see smiling faces. I can imagine that you're saying, "Hey, today's the wrap up. We're going to get to go home." And I know it's been a long and packed week for you. We wish you safe travels when you do make that journey home later today. And thank you for all the hard work and the attention you've given to all of the materials that have been shared with you and all of the ideas. We've got a real special treat this morning in having one of our experienced chancellors from a leader college and from one of our winners of Leah Meyer Austin Awards here with us this morning. So before he has a chance to come to the stage, I just wanted to remind you, you know that we've kind of flipped the order for this morning. We're going to give Steve the podium first so we can be inspired by him. And then you'll go from this session, we'll have Cynthia Farrell will come up and give us a little bit of an intro about what's going to happen during team time. You'll be given a good block of time to do some planning, some focusing on what's going to happen over the summer for your team. And then we'd like you to come back at the 11 o'clock hour back into this room and be prepared to share with us one or two highlights from your experience. Cynthia's going to explain it. She's just given me a signal. I'm stealing her material. You'll be asked to share with the group either an aha moment in this week for your team, something that suddenly became very real and meaningful to you, or a major breakthrough you might have had, or a major commitment you've decided to make to go home, or something you're very enthusiastic and excited about. Anything in that realm, but something that really captures kind of the spirit and the place that you're at as you leave Charlotte and go back to your home. So Cynthia will say more about that later. Without further ado, because our speaker, Steve, said, "Don't take up all my time," I want to introduce one of the most fun chancellors we have. He's just been such an inspiration in achieving the dream. He's the chancellor of Phillips Community College at the University of Arkansas in Arkansas. And we've known Steve from a long time. He's gone through a number of initiatives that we've been connected to. But the story he has to tell about how his institution faced some of the realities of what was happening in his very poor part of Arkansas, it's really inspiring and instructive. And so we are very grateful to you, Steve, for being willing to share your story this morning. And so without further ado, will you share that story with us?
It is a pleasure to speak to you this morning, and I was scheduled for the 11 o'clock session. I was supposed to be the closer, but instead of coming in the ninth inning, I guess I'm coming in the seventh inning. That's usually a disaster for a closer, but because they can't last 3 innings. But unlike a closer in baseball, I'm not supposed to put out the fire this morning. I think I'm supposed to fan some of the flames, and I'm going to attempt to do that, as Carol suggested, by telling you the story of Phillips Community College. It's my story. It's the only story that I know well enough to tell you, but I do think it's a story that is reflective in a lot of ways of where community colleges have been, where they are now, and where we may be heading. I believe in the power of story. I believe that the stories that we tell ourselves and that we tell one another help to define who we are. They help to determine how we do the work. I think each of us has an individual story, but institutions have institutional narratives as well, and those institutional narratives are created by they're created in bits and pieces by the stories that we tell one another, that we pass back and forth among faculty and students and the people in the communities that we serve. And I think those stories, those institutional narratives, have changed from generation to generation for community colleges. In the boardroom, just outside my office, there are 3 pictures on the wall. Those are pictures of the 3 CEOs of Phillips Community College. We've been an institution with great stability, so there are only 3 pictures on the wall. There have only been 3 presidents or chancellors of Phillips Community College. But I think those 3 stories, those 3 pictures help to tell a story about where community colleges have been and where we're headed. The first picture on the wall is Dr. John Easley. He was our founding president. His story was a first-generation community college story. He had 2 goals: to increase enrollment and to build buildings. And if someone in the community asked how the college was going, he would tell them that, the college is going great. Our enrollment last fall was a record enrollment, and we're building a new building because we need more classrooms for the students that are coming through our door. Dr. Easley started every morning out by stopping down and visiting the guys in maintenance. And I think he did that because they were the people who took care of the buildings. They kept the place looking good. And the second thing that he would do every morning was to stop by the registrar's office. I think he did that because the registrar was the person who counted the students. Those were the 2 things that were most important to him: how many students we'd enrolled and the physical plant. He rarely visited faculty offices. In fact, I remember one time when he visited my office. I shared an office with another instructor. He gave me a call and said he was coming by the office. Our office was it was cluttered. That was kind of a kind description. So we spent the next 2 minutes throwing everything in drawers, getting rid of the clutter, sticking things in the closet, and then by the time he walked through the door, we were seated at our desk looking at grading papers. So that's the only time I remember him ever visiting our office. By the way, he was coming by to ask me if I would co-chair the self-study for our reaccreditation process, and I agreed to. His wife, who was the business department chair, was my co-chair for that process. That year, I had more power than I have had in 30 years since. It's the power that comes from working closely with the person who sleeps with the president every night is just tremendous. I had his ear for that year, but that didn't last too long. But that was Dr. Easley's story. It was a story about increasing enrollment. It was a story about growing the physical plant. And as a founding community college president, I think that was probably a fairly typical story. The second president of Phillips Community College was Dr. Stephen Jones. His story was really a variation of that first generation community college story. It was also a story about growing enrollment, about building new buildings. The only real difference was that the growth came from establishing 2 additional campuses in an adjacent county and building buildings on those campuses rather than on the original campus in Helena. But it was still a story about increased enrollment, growing the size of the physical plant. We didn't talk about student success. We did talk about retention because we knew that if we retained more students, we could increase our enrollment. And we were told that it was cheaper to retain a student than to recruit a new student. So that was an additional reason why we needed to focus on retention. And we developed retention plans so that we could retain more students. We talked some about customer service because we thought if we were actually nice to students, they might stay, and that would increase enrollment. And we were given a badge, a button that said, "We put students first." And we all wore our "We put students first" buttons because we were told to wear our buttons. But we really, behind his back, snickered about that because we knew that we didn't put students first. We put ourselves first. We put faculty first. And as soon as we could, we stopped wearing our "We put students first" buttons. I still have my button. It's in my desk drawer. I take it out occasionally to remind myself that everything that I believe is not necessarily so, and everything that I say is not necessarily believed. It's a good reminder of that. But when we talked about students, we talked about retaining more students in order to increase enrollment. That was the focus. The next president of Phillips Community College was me. That's my picture. Well, it's not actually my picture. It's the hook on the wall where my picture was hanging. Over time, the background of the picture had faded, and it started to look like we had kept the proof from Olin Mills rather than actually buying the picture. And my secretary couldn't stand it any longer, so she took it down and she sent it off to be repaired, or at least that's her story, and she's sticking to it. My concern, my favorite part of those three pictures is a little tag at the bottom that has the date that the president began, and when his tenure ended. And the little tag at the bottom of mine says 2003 dash, and then there's the blank space. And that blank space has always been my favorite part of that picture, because as long as it's there, it means I'm alive and I have a job. My concern is that she's going to bring it back and it's going to say 2003 to 2014. And it will be the board's subtle way of telling me that I'm out of here. But that's all that's hanging on the wall there, is that hook at that point. I became chancellor in 2003. I'd been vice chancellor for instruction for 11 years prior to that. We became, in 96, a part of the University of Arkansas system. And so my title is chancellor instead of president, because the CEO of the system is the president. And my first day as chancellor, the president met with me, and he told me he had never met an internal candidate who was more popular, and I was as popular as I would ever be. There was a lot of truth to at least the second part of that statement. Quite frankly, I think I was promoted to the chancellor position because people liked me, and I had a reputation for being able to solve problems, to fix things, and there were things that we needed to fix. The truth is that I, at that point, did not know what my story was. I didn't have a vision. I was the chancellor, and there were some things that we could fix, and we set about fixing them. We were in the process, again, of reaccreditation, so we spent a year or so writing a bang-up self-study report, and we received the maximum reaccreditation. And then after that was completed, we put together a report listing all of the things, all of the bullets in our self-study report and in the visiting team's exit report, all of the things that we needed to do. And we called that the work ahead, and we spent a year or so working on that. And one of the first things I did was to do what I referred to as the Nike tour. I visited all 3 campuses, and I asked people what we should just do, and then we set about doing that. So we fixed a lot of things over the first 2 or 3 years, but the reality was that I didn't have a vision of where the college should be headed. I didn't have an institutional story to tell beyond the fact that there were some things that were broken and we ought to fix them. By that point, we had pretty much run out of things that we could fix. There were some people that I would like to have fixed that were beyond fixing, but beyond, other than that was about it. And Phillips Community College, the question that I had was, where do we go from here? Phillips Community College is located in the Mississippi River Delta. 3 of our 5 county service areas are among the 100 poorest counties in the nation, measured by median family income. It's an area, a region that has experienced dramatic out-migration for at least 40 years. So the notion that we're going to significantly increase enrollment is rather naive. And we're not going to build a lot of buildings because our enrollment has been flat for several years. Our state funding has been flat for several years. We're lucky if we can build a new building once every 10 years. So that first generation community college story clearly could no longer be our story. The circumstances simply wouldn't let us tell that story to one another and believe that story. Dr. Easley would usually at the beginning of every year at a faculty and staff meeting talk about how the college had begun in the old Naval Reserve building, and how when he first saw the campus it was just a thicket, and how that first year everyone pitched together and put together tables and desks and chairs, and they started the campus. They moved into the first building that first year, and that story we could no longer tell one another with any kind of credibility. And then Phillips Community College was selected by the Winthrop Rockefeller Foundation to participate in Achieving the Dream. We were one of 4 colleges in Arkansas selected to participate in Achieving the Dream. Achieving the Dream, as you know, is an initiative that has as its goals to increase student success, especially for students of color and economically disadvantaged students. About 51% of our students are African American, about 49% of our students are white. Over 75% of our students receive the Pell Grant. Most of our students aren't simply poor, they come from generational poverty. Many of them don't know anyone in their family that could be described as a success in any kind of middle class sense of that word. They're not simply poor. They don't know what it's like to not have been poor. There's no one in their family who knows what it's like to not have been poor. So the goals of Achieving the Dream and the circumstances of Phillips Community College seemed to be a good fit. And we were off and running, creating what I think in a lot of ways is a second generation community college story. We might not be able to get bigger as a college, but we could get bigger, we could get better as a college, and we ought to just do it. We made 2 key decisions at the very beginning of our Achieving the Dream experience that I think were extremely important for our Achieving the Dream work. One decision that we made was to confront head-on the issues of class and poverty, class and race, of poverty and race. And I think in some ways we're atypical as even an Achieving the Dream college in that respect, because a lot of times the goal is to raise the tide with the hope that if the tide rises, that all of the boats will be lifted, without really looking directly at the issues of economic disadvantage and the issues of race. Some goals, some colleges focus, I think, almost exclusively on strategy and ignore Peter Drucker's dictum that culture eats strategy for breakfast. I know you heard David Dodson yesterday, and I've heard him quote Drucker, and I hope he repeated that quote to you yesterday. But we believed it was very important for us to address issues of culture, for us to address head-on the obstacles to student success that poverty and race can represent. So that was a first key decision for us. The second key decision was to use what we've called our common reader approach, a way of keeping folks focused on those attentions, on those issues. Both my chief academic officer and I were English instructors in previous lives. So this notion of taking a book and spending some time reading and talking about that book with other people was a natural for us. We began looking at the issue of class, because for us it was a much easier issue to discuss than race. For everyone, I think probably an easier issue to discuss than race. And that first year, we bought every college employee a copy of Ruby Payne's Bridges Out of Poverty. And we spent the entire year in a series of conversations about the characteristics of students who come from a background of generational poverty, and more importantly, how we as an institution could respond to students who came to us with those characteristics. The focus was always on how we would respond as an institution, because we decided that year that we were not going to waste any of our time griping about our students. Previously, every time we would talk about our students, we'd end up griping about them, and we'd end up saying, well, if the high schools would just send us better students, we could be a better community college and we'd have better outcomes. Well, the reality is the high schools weren't going to send us better students. They were going to continue to send us the students they had been sending us. That was the card, that was the hand we had been dealt, and we needed to figure out how to play those cards. So we resolved among ourselves that we wouldn't gripe about our students, that instead we'd focus on how we could respond as an institution to those students. But we spent the entire year discussing Bridges Out of Poverty. We had breakfast meetings, we had lunch meetings, we devoted all of our in-service activities to that issue. We brought in Philip Duvall for our spring in-service event. We had poverty simulations. We spent the entire the entire year on that issue. And we learned a tremendous amount that first year. We learned that most of our faculty and staff didn't understand most of our students. Most of our students come from a background of generational poverty. Most of our faculty and staff do not. We learned that we can't change the characteristics that our students bring with them, but we could change how we as an institution respond to those characteristics. The epiphany for me that I will never forget was one of our conversations where a faculty member broke the rule and started griping about a student that she had, a student who was plenty bright in her 8 o'clock class, who was late for class about half the time and was in danger of being dropped from the class because she was had been late so many times. And another instructor who knew the student well said, this is what her morning is like. She gets up in the morning. She's a single mother with 2 small children. She gets her children ready. She puts them in a stroller. She pushes them about 10 blocks to the daycare center. She drops them off. She leaves the stroller there so it'll be there for her in the afternoon. She walks about 15 blocks to a CityLink stop. CityLink was a fixed route transportation system, a van system. You could pay $1 and you could ride it all day for $1. It was notorious for being reliable. It didn't show up when it was supposed to, where it was supposed to, and it's since gone bankrupt probably because it was so reliable. But she'd drop the children off. She'd walk 15 blocks to that CityLink stop, and if the van showed up when it was supposed to, she could catch the van and make her 8 o'clock class on time. But most of the time, the van didn't show up when it was supposed to, or she had trouble getting the kids ready. You know, what we realized was that her morning was a house of cards, and more mornings than not, that house of cards collapsed. One of the instructors said, why did we enroll her in an 8 o'clock class anyway? Because she had some classes later in the morning, and she was never late for those classes. So we began to see that was an advising issue, that if an advisor knew that student well enough, we could change how we responded as an institution to the circumstances of that student's life. We learned that we could change as an institution in how we responded to our student characteristics. We also learned that students succeed within the context of family and community. Students bring with them to college the resources of their family and the resources of their community. And for many of our students, that means that they bring with them limited resources. Let me give you an example of that from my own experiences. My father dropped out of high school to join the Navy. My mother dropped out of high school to marry my father when he returned from the Navy. My dad eventually completed his high school diploma. My mother never did. I did not have, when I went to college, the resource of parents who could help me navigate the college's bureaucracy. I was pretty much on my own in terms of family resources in that respect. I was the first member of my family who had ever gone to college. When I told my mother that I was changing my major to English, she was okay with that because she thought, well, I'd come back and I'd teach English at the local high school and I could make a good living doing that. When I told her that I had no interest in teaching in high school, that I wanted to be a college instructor, she was aghast. She had never seen one. She didn't know what a college English instructor looked like. There were no jobs around there teaching English in college, and she was concerned that I might be setting myself up for starvation or something. That was not a world that she knew anything about. So I didn't have parents who could help me navigate the bureaucracy, that could give me advice and help me to make wise decisions. What I did have were parents who believed in the power of an education. I never could remember a time when I didn't know that I was supposed to graduate from high school and go to college. I didn't know that I had a choice. So I did have the resource of parents who believed that I had to graduate from high school and I had to go to college. Many of the children in the communities that we serve don't have that resource. They don't have any adult in their family who holds out that expectation that they graduate from high school and that they go to college. So we decided as a college that we needed to help create that resource. The Phillips Community College Foundation created an endowment that allowed us to make a promise that we called the Great River Promise. Since we're on the Mississippi River, we've called it the Great River Promise. And beginning in 2010, we promised the children in our community that if they graduated from high school, either public or private, in the 2 counties that compose our tax district, that they can attend Phillips Community College tuition free and with all of their mandatory fees paid. It's sort of like the thing Starbucks did, but we did it on a smaller scale, and they have to come to one college. And there aren't as many catches with our promise. The only thing that there's no fine print. They just have to graduate from high school, and they can't have gotten into any trouble with drugs or alcohol while they're in school. And if they do that, they're eligible for the Great River Promise. The thing that I like most about it is that the school districts agreed to let us come in starting in the 3rd grade to tell students about the Great River Promise and to come back every year to tell students about the Great River Promise. So starting in the 3rd grade, we come in with our signs and our banners, and we tell them that if they'll just graduate from high school and stay out of trouble, they can attend Phillips Community College free. And we have temporary tattoos with the Great River Promise logo that we send home with them. We dress them up in graduation gowns and mortar boards, and we take pictures of them, and we send those pictures home of them dressed up as a college graduate, because we want to create for them that expectation that they're going to graduate from high school and that they're going to go to college. And the research shows that most poor people think that they can't afford to attend college when they really can. So we want to make them understand that if they do these things, if they make these right choices, that they will be able to afford to attend college. They can attend Phillips Community College. So we are creating that resource that our family and our community, that their family and our community doesn't provide for them. We also learn that we need to own every obstacle to student success, not just the academic obstacles. Our faculty, students drop out of college for a variety of reasons, and a lot of times they drop out of college for non-academic reasons. They drop out of college because their lives are chaotic, and the chaos eventually sucks them under. We have decided that we are going to own every obstacle to student success, not just the ones that are academic in nature. So our faculty and staff furnished an apartment for a student who was moving to our community to escape an abusive relationship. We had an evening student who was going to drop out, her advisor said, because she had small children and she had lost her babysitter. Our faculty babysat her children for 2 weeks and found her a responsible babysitter, and she graduated that semester. She was in her last semester when her babysitter quit, and she was going to drop out. Believe me, if faculty are babysitting small children, they will find a babysitter in a hurry. It did not take them long. But she was able to complete because we owned that obstacle. In a strictly logical sense, that's not our responsibility. It's not our business to find babysitters for students. They're her children. But we've decided that all of those obstacles are our obstacles because they're our students. We're not drawing the line between those that we should be responsible for and those that we don't have to be. So we've decided to own every obstacle. The second year, we decided that we'd tackle the issue of race. And we decided to use as our common reader Nathan McCall's novel, Them. And in the context of them, if you're black, them are white. And if you're white, them are black. And we took the same approach. We provided every full-time employee a copy of Nathan McCall's novel. We spent the entire year in small group and large group sessions discussing the novel and discussing the issue of race and our attitudes and our perceptions about that issue. We brought Dr. McCall in for our spring in-service. Both years we posted all of the notes of our conversation on our intranet so everyone could participate in the conversation and everyone on each campus could follow the conversations on the other campuses. We not only survived that year of talking about race, but we also demonstrated to ourselves, to our students, to the community, that we could have civil, respectful conversations about important issues about which we disagree. That we could discuss that issue, but we could still, and we could be open and honest, but we could still treat each other with respect. My concern is that as a culture, as a nation, we've almost lost the ability to do that. And I don't know if we can survive as a democracy if we lose that ability to disagree with one another respectfully, with civility. We seem to have to demonize the people with whom we disagree. If I'm a liberal Democrat, I have to think that the Tea Parties are Neanderthals, and if I'm a Tea Partier, I have to think that President Obama is the greatest threat to human freedom since the Galactic Empire. It's not enough to think that people are wrong. I have to think that they're evil. We demonstrated that we could rise above that we could have these conversations, even if we didn't agree all of the time, but we could respect one another, and we could treat each other with civility. And again, we learned a great deal that year. We learned that we weren't as colorblind as we thought we were. We learned that an open door is not in itself a solution to the issue of equity. Some of you are sitting out there thinking that there are no issues of structural inequity on your campuses because, after all, you're an open door institution, and community colleges are the most egalitarian, they're the most democratic of institutions. If your door is open, there are no issues like that. We learned that that's not the case, that an open door does not in itself provide equity. Some students stand at that open door with much heavier baggage than other students. And some students look through that open door and see almost no one who looks like them. And we as an institution have to address those issues. We have to address those inequities. We learn that equity and equality are not the same thing, that equality is treating everyone the same way as if they're all alike, even when you know they're not, and that equity is being fair given the circumstances. We learn that you don't resolve issues of race by discussing them for a year. The in-service that we had with Nathan McCall was, from my perspective, one of the greatest events that I've been involved in at Phillips Community College. It was supposed to be 90 minutes long. It went 3 hours long. He answered every question that we raised. I was on cloud nine. I told our faculty and staff at the end of that event that I'd never been more proud to be Chancellor of Phillips Community College. And we always, at every in-service event, have faculty and staff fill out an evaluation. And we got the results of those evaluations back. And I discovered that about 85% of our faculty and staff agreed with me, and about 15% said, "Why are we discussing this? Why are we stirring things up?" White privilege, there's no such thing as white privilege. So we learned that you don't resolve issues of race by discussing them for a year. So we spent the next year working with 4 Clinton school students, creating a curriculum that we could use for a series of conversations about race. Small group conversations that are intended to end with some commitment to take some action to further racial reconciliation. A way of continuing in some sort of structured way those conversations that had occurred in a largely ad hoc way. We've used a common reader almost every year since we began with Bridges Out of Poverty. We've selected works that allow us to continue our conversation about class and race. We received a National Endowment for the Arts for a big read project, and we selected Carson McCullers' novel The Heart is a Lonely Hunter because it was set in a town very much like ours, and we could use it to continue those conversations. This year we used Isabel Wilkerson's book, The Warmth of Other Suns, about the great migration of African Americans from the South to the North and Midwest and West between 1915 and 1975. Next year, we're looking at tackling the issue of gender and using Khaled Hosseini's 1,000 Splendid Suns as our common reader. The common reader has become, for me, a way. It's become a leadership tool. It's become a way for us to get everyone on the page figuratively by getting them on the same page literally. It's become a way of gradually changing the institutional narrative, a way of creating and retelling that institutional story. The story of achieving the dream has become the story of Phillips Community College. It has become the story of a college that is doing everything that it can to enable students to succeed. 2 years ago, we had some outside evaluators connected with the Center for Working Families initiative come in and spend a week with us talking with our faculty and staff. And this is what they had to say at the end of that week. PCCUA has staked the full range of its expertise and resources upon becoming an innovative academic culture that is willing to do whatever it takes to improve students' prospects for completing their educational goals and finding a career pathway out of poverty. They decided that this was the story of a college that was willing, in their words, to do whatever it takes to move students out of poverty, to do whatever it takes to enable students to be successful. You're going to go back to your own campuses, and achieving the dream will become whatever you make of it. It may become just another initiative, and you may go through the work, and your institution may not be significantly transformed, or it may be something that transcends the notion of initiative, and it may be something that transforms institutional culture in the way that it has transformed our culture. Let me give you some practical advice. If your desire is what I hope it is, if your desire is what I believe it should be, to use your Achieving the Dream work to transform your institution, to recreate, to create a new institutional narrative. When you get back home, you need to tell your story over and over again. Almost every internal email that I send out has some sort of tagline about student success. It'll be a Kay McKinney quote about students don't do optional, or it'll be a definition of student success, or it'll be James Baldridge's quote about not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced. There'll be some quote about student success. Every now and then I throw in something that's not connected just to make sure they're still reading to the bottom. But apparently most of the time, most of them read to the bottom of the email. But it's a way of keeping that notion of student success in front of them as often as possible, making it a part of our institutional values. We have 3 institutional values, 3 core values that have grown directly out of our student success work. Our 3rd year in Achieving the Dream, at the fall in service, I asked our faculty and staff what our institutional values were. We had 9 of them. They were in the catalog. They had been in the catalog unchanged for 15 years. And I knew because I remember when they went into the catalog, Steve Jones, whom you met earlier, was the president. It was the mid-90s. We were about to have a Higher Learning Commission site visit. There was the expectation that a college would have institutional values. So he wrote up these 9 institutional values and brought them to his cabinet and showed them to us. And we said, them some good values. We like those. And we stuck them in the catalog, and they'd been there unchanged for 15 years. I asked them at that in-service what our values were. No one in the room could tell me more than 3 of those values. So I said they must not be our values because we don't even know what they are. So we spent that year giving faculty and staff an opportunity to tell us what they believed, what they valued. Our Achieving the Dream core team took all of that input and looked for common threads, and there was a clear consensus around 3 values: a commitment to student success, a commitment to the success of every student, a belief in the ability of education to transform individuals and build stronger communities, and a commitment to diversity that we define very simply as was respecting the inherent worth of every person. Those values are in front of us every day. They're in almost every room on all 3 campuses. When we come together at the fall in-service, have our breakfast, the tables are arranged, and you have to decide which tables to go first. What I did the next year was let the table that did best identifying our 3 values go first. So that now, every year when they come back for the breakfast, they've boned up. They've reviewed their notes. They can tell me what our 3 values are. When we have some sort of PowerPoint and somebody's up here rambling, we'll have those 3 values rotating on the screen. We are telling that story over and over and over again. It's our story. Number 2, you need to look at some ugly numbers. Some of you think that you're all that. Some of you think you're a pretty good college and you've got everything pretty much under control, and you're like the children of Lake Wobegon. You're all above average. Look at the numbers, and I can guarantee that you're going to see some ugly numbers. Look at we talk about, well, not every, the iPads, they're not reliable. They don't tell our whole story. All of our students don't come trying to seek a degree, and those are just the full-time students. We serve a lot of part-time students. We'll put the part-time students in there and see if that improves your graduation rate. I guarantee that it doesn't. It will lower it. And look at the number of students who enroll with you and do not complete a single credit their first semester. No one comes to you with a goal of being an abysmal failure, of not earning a single college credit their first semester. Look at the percentage of students who do that, who do not have anything to show for their first semester of college work. Look at those ugly numbers. Identify the high-risk courses, the courses that have the highest failure rate, and make everyone aware of what those high-risk courses are. I believe in the power of public shaming as a motivator. You know, when we had a psychology instructor who was appalled to learn that her course was one of the top 5 high-risk courses, and she began to change how she teaches those courses, and her student outcomes have improved. But be brave enough to look at those ugly numbers. They're there. You just need to put them out there in front of people. Secondly, you need to turn the percentages into numbers. No one can really get excited about increasing your graduation rate from 25% to 27%. You can't really wrap your arms around that. Turn the percentages into numbers. Make the goal increasing your number of graduates by 100 or 200 or whatever makes sense for an institution of your size. Faculty can wrap their arms around that notion of we're just going to graduate 75 more students next year. For us, that meant one more student per faculty. You can have an impact there. I, as an instructor, my goal is to have one more student successful in every class this year than I had last year. Turn the percentages into numbers. Number 3, turn the numbers into people. Turn the numbers into people and let those people tell their stories. We had a student produce a video for Achieving the Dream about 3 years ago, and when I was watching her make the video, she referred to coming to us and being in the dark. She had dropped out of college. She had gotten involved with drugs. She had a small child, an infant, and she talked about being in the dark when she came to us. I thought that was a metaphor, that she was in the dark and she enrolled at Phillips and the lights came on. Afterwards, I learned that wasn't a metaphor, that when she enrolled with us, she had been living in an old house without electricity with an infant child for 6 months. She had been living literally in the dark, not figuratively in the dark. We transformed her life when she enrolled at Phillips Community College. Another student, LaTanya, returned home to Helena, where our largest campus is located, with 3 kids. She had been married for about a decade. Her husband was so abusive that he eventually ended up in the penitentiary with a 20-year sentence for trying to kill her and for kidnapping her. She returned home with 3 small children, no job skills, no way of providing for them, thoroughly defeated by life. She got a little part-time job at a dentist office. One of the dentist's patients was a retired instructor from Phillips who suggested that she ought to go out there to the college and talk to those folks about going to college. LaTanya had never even considered that because she was the youngest of 11 kids. None of her 10 older brothers and sisters had gone to college. Her parents had always either worked minimum wage jobs or been on welfare. She had been a mediocre high school student. She came to us and excelled. She ended up telling her story to a work conference in New York Grant Makers for Education to over 700 people and getting a standing ovation. She's told her story to our the University of Arkansas Board of Trustees. She talks to our students during orientation every fall semester. She's learned that her story is not something to be ashamed of, but it's a story of triumph. And last month she walked across the stage and shook my hand because she had received a bachelor's degree by one of our sister universities that offered the program on our campus. And she has a good paying job in our Gear Up program, and her children talk about what college they're going to go to when they graduate from high school. Our institutional narrative has changed her family narrative. It's changed her story and her children's stories. You need to turn those numbers into people, and you need to let those people tell their stories over and over again. You need to celebrate your successes, but you also need to mourn your failures. Our graduation rate now is about 25%. That's not nearly high enough. We've doubled it, but that's not nearly high enough, because what that means is for every student who graduates, there are 3 who fail to. For every Latanya, there are 3 who aren't successful in a reasonable period of time. We need to acknowledge that. We need to celebrate the Latanyas, but we also need to mourn our failures. We need to ask ourselves what happens to that 3 out of 4 that don't make it. What is their story? What happens to them when they leave us? How dare we cling to the old way? How dare we cling to the status quo? How dare we be satisfied with business as usual when business as usual means that there are 3 times as many failures as successes? It's simply unconscionable for us to be satisfied with the way things are. We need to celebrate our successes, but we also need to mourn our failures. We can do better. At Phillips Community College, we will do better. Achieving the Dream has been for us a vehicle for doing better, and it can be a vehicle for doing better for you. It has become our story, and that's my story, and I'm sticking with it. I love the hourglass quote, "Great stories happen to those who can tell them." You need to go back and make a great story happen at your college. Thank you, folks.
Wow. Thank you so much, Dr. Murray, for that story. That was so touching. That was so appropriate. I'm so glad the timing of it changed, because it's appropriate for where we are as a group for this institute that we've been in together. I feel like the title of your presentation could have been the title of this entire institute, because what we've been doing this whole time is telling our story. We started out with the students up here at that very first panel, if you remember, and they told their story, and it really grounded us in why we do this work. And then I was remembering also, as you were talking, how Leah Meyer Austin, also in her very first panel, how she told the story about ATD and how we had some founding presidents of this movement who committed us to some core values, and we rehearsed them again in front of each other, and we continue to tell our story, and how proud that makes us to be a part of this network and this movement. Thank you very much for sharing your story. So we're getting ready to go out to our last breakout.